Welcome back to Partnerships Unraveled, the podcast where we unravel the mysteries about partnerships and channel on a weekly basis. My name's Alex Whitford. I'm the VP of Revenue here at Channix, and this week I'm very excited to welcome our special guest, Claudette. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Alex. How are you?
I'm doing extremely well. Maybe if that initiated, you could give us a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what you do.
Okay, so Claudette Atkinson. I've done a number of things, really. I mean, I'm an industry veteran, I guess you would call me. I look a lot older than I should, I suppose, having been in the channel that long. But, you know, I've worked in distribution, so I've managed business units in distribution. I've worked at partner. I've worked at various vendors, including IBM. I've worked at Cisco, and I've worked at Palo Alto Networks. So you might say I've been around the block a little bit.
And some hell of a names in there as well. I know you've been part of some huge transformation, but more importantly, you're part of my favourite area of the channel, which is distribution, which I think
love distribution.
Love distribution. I think it's at the coalface while being the most strategic, while being the fastest, while being the most complicated, and the best people are there. So,
exactly.
Yeah. So one of the things that I find really interesting, and I've done this myself, negotiated internally, but I've also negotiated on this podcast. Hey, distribution's about to die. Like, there's no way it's going to make it. And then 3 months later, it's like, oh, maybe distribution's the core of the channel. How do you think, and why do you think distribution continues to thrive, even though everyone's predicting its death?
It's funny. I think I've been around long enough for every one of those moments where somebody said, this is the thing that's going to kill distribution.
Yeah.
I think for me, and, you know, as I said, I've worked in and around distribution for a long time, that distribution does well is reinvention, right? They figure out very quickly where their role can be. So if something new comes out, I think one of the things that, you know, many people are talking about now is the role of the CSP, right? The AWS, the GCPs of this world, and how that affects how business goes through channel. And I've seen really good examples of distributors making acquisitions that allows them to operate and to kind of mitigate any impact to their business. So I think creativity, they are incredibly good at being the band-aid, I think, over, you know, the vendors' businesses in some way, but finding the gaps. It's like, you know, water always finds the exit. I kind of feel like distribution is, they find that point where they can add the value and they reinvent themselves to do that. So I think, and they've been doing it for years, right? So it's just something, you know, really cool to watch, that, you know, it may be presented as a problem. It may be presented as something that you would see a threat to their business, but they are always managing to create this level of reinvention.
Yeah, I have a mentor of mine. I was a running joke on this podcast, but I hate the word strategy. I think strategy is a nonsense term that consultants use when they're just talking about how do we do things properly. Yeah. But a mentor of mine, he just says strategy is customer feedback executed. And I think distribution is uniquely placed because they get feedback from everyone. So they get to hard pivot because suddenly, you know, the vendor says, hey, we need this, or the partner says, or their competitor, or whatever. And so they have to actually chase and drive that value.
No, I agree. And I think the other thing that they have is data, and many of them use it well to create the opportunities and to find out where those opportunities are, because it's not like, you know, 30 years ago the deal might land in your lap and all you've got to do is quote it at 30% margin. You know, they're fighting for every piece of it and they have to be creative. So I think it's, you know, testament to what they do, being able to use the data that they gather to create opportunity both for the vendor, the partner, and even some of the disties are working with end users to do that. So, you know, creativity is definitely part of it, using the data that they have.
So you've worked your way through the whole channel stack, so distie, vendor, reseller. Talk to me about how having that, I suppose, 360 view has influenced how you sort of build strategy.
That's a really good question, because I think for me, empathy runs through it, right? Because if you've been in someone's shoes, you kind of understand what impact the next decision that you're going to make will have, right? Now, you may still make it, but at least you might make some kind of like adjustments based on how does this particular thing that I want to do look if I'm a partner? How does it look if I'm a distributor, right? And I think having that view allows you to make better decisions that is less impactful in a negative way on the channel. So That's how I use it. Sometimes there's days you're like, oh, I must do this thing. And I'm sitting there and go, no, sit back a little bit. If you were sitting in distribution, if you were a vendor manager, you're a key account manager sitting in distribution, how do you receive this and what's in it for me? So kind of having that constant thought of what each other's experience could be is something I think that helps me do.
Yeah, I was talking to a chap by the name of Dan Danielli, best name in the channel,
It is.
but also he runs distribution strategy for
I know
Kraft.
him.
Yeah, really good guy. And he was talking about the power of lateral moves, and he was saying like it's great if you can work left and right in the channel. That's how you move up because of that empathy, right? It's,
Yes.
I think everyone is sat, and if you're at a dist, you got a vendor lands easy, you vendor reseller lands easy, and then once you've been there, you're like, okay, they're just different.
Yeah, and there's that whole piece. I remember having this conversation with an account manager at a company, one of the vendors that I worked at, and he had been an account manager and a very aggressive, or I should say passionate account manager, and he moved to do the channel role after he'd been doing the account manager. And I remember speaking to him afterwards about it. I said, oh, how are you getting on in that channel role? He said, it's the hardest job I've ever done. And I think what it reminded me of this phrase my dad always used to use, walk a mile in someone's shoes, right? So that you experience and understand. And I think, that's definitely what I feel gives me a unique view in terms of saying, or being able to have a conversation with a distributor and saying, you know what? I get it. I understand because I've been there, right?
I'm constantly on this podcast pioneering or calling out that I think marketing in the channel is underrepresented, underloved, because I think there's a huge value there. And sort of marketing and distribution, maybe that's that times 10, because I think people talk about distribution strategy and it's partner acquisition, how do we sell more, right? And then they sort of forget that marketing is there to sort of drive that behavior. What's your view on how the channel views marketing and distribution and those two worlds coming together?
I think that most vendors expect it. Not sure that all vendors pay enough for it, right? That's what I would say. And what I see in our distributors in terms of marketing is just innovation, right? Every time, because you can't keep paying and doing the same things every quarter. That whole adage of knocking your head against the brick wall, right? It's kind of like you need to kind of like create and reinvent. And I'm astounded a lot of the times at some of the programs and the things that our guys put together. I think you're right. They're not necessarily seen and given the credibility and accolades that they should get, but I see some really good stuff coming out of many of our distributors and things I think we wouldn't necessarily think about. I mean, we're very focused when you're in a vendor, you're very focused on perhaps the end user piece, right? And we want our distributors to provide scale because we don't have limitless people to handle every partner. So you want your distribution piece to be scaling and to be able to do that in a meaningful way, and actually doing that using data, marketing campaigns, whether it's LinkedIn or it's telesales, whatever they're doing to build pipeline is really credible. In some cases, I see it better than some people who, been in the industry who think that they know everything around marketing. Some of the things I see coming from some of the really young people in some of our distributors is incredibly creative.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's one of the interesting things about distribution. The average age of the talent in distribution is different. The vendor is significantly younger, which comes with definitely some upsides and some challenges. One of the really tough things, I think, having managed distribution teams and then managed distributors is retention of the really great people is tough, because I did, and I know a lot of people who work in distribution, they go, perfect, I'm going to work my way up and I'm going to jump to a vendor and double my salary. That's the goal, which puts disties in a hard position. They don't make the margin that a vendor does, right? And yet they've got to maintain structure and performance and cadence. How do you think they go about doing that?
Yeah, it depends on the distributor. Maybe what I'll talk about is what I've seen that is good.
Yeah.
Some of the disties that I've worked have created academies, so they're bringing in young blood all of the time, continually training that, and accepting that there is that piece at the top that when they've done 3 years, they might end up going to a vendor. Right now, I've always had this rule that I don't go and poach from distribution, right, wherever I've worked. But ultimately, those people are still going to want to come to you, and it might be the next step of their career. But I think this constant feed of talent, I think creating the right culture in the company so that, people want to stay around for a little bit. And generally, I see the culture in distribution tends to be a bit more fun, tends to be a bit more family-like in some ways. So I think if they get that right, but they keep this continual talent coming through, and maybe partnering. I've seen some good partnering with, apprentices. I know one of our Disty takes in apprentices and trains them up, and I've seen many success stories of those. But I think it's a constant thing. I don't think it's any one thing. They've just got to keep it moving. Make sure you got good leaders looking after those people, so they want to hang around. I mean, I've seen Disties who've got people working there for 16, 17 years. So it can be done, but you're right. There is this pressure to keep moving in order to sort of the younger ones or people who feel that the vendor is the next step, just to make sure that you've got backfill coming in to keep that constant.
Yeah, so I'm a big lean in person. So I think the right way, and it sounds like we've landed on the same conclusion, you can either try and avoid it, right?
Yeah.
And shout at the vendor for taking your people, or I actually think the right way is lean in and go, it's probably a good thing if we create this academy of talent.
Yes.
That loves our company, that then goes to work for the vendors.
Exactly.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And Taxay, which are not a distributor, so they're a distributor. But what they've done brilliantly is they bring talent in, and then those talent leaves to manage
their business. Yeah,
it's perfect, right? Because then they understand all the nuances and the culture and the people and the structure. And I just sort of go, that's the right way to do this.
It's genius in a way, because ultimately you're building a fan base within the vendor, right?
Yeah, and we all know, right, distribution leaders have an ability to, well, they can't direct individual deals, nor should they. They can course correct, right? They can prioritize certain initiatives, and over a long enough time horizon, that can make a wonderful difference.
Yeah, but also, I mean, the other thing for me is many of the distributors that I've dealt with over the years are developing such amazing services, right? That, if you've got somebody within the vendor who understands that and how you can leverage that to do more of the vendor's business, guess what? That business is coming to you, right? So that understanding and having someone there is important.
So one of the reasons everyone's calling the death knell of distribution is because service providers exist and managed service providers exist. And so obviously that means Disty is dead. Except distribution are turning into service providers. How do you see those sort of worlds coming together, and how, again, distribution has made another, what I think is amazing pivot to support that go-to-market?
Interestingly, well, with service providers, is it a threat to Disty? Maybe not. I think what they've got to do is understand what role they have to play within a service provider, right? Because generally there are different types of or parts of their business that the Disty can support. But generally, I think with the vendors that I've dealt with, the SP business is still going through the channel. I think the CSPs slightly different, because obviously, you've got this whole new scenario of quota that needs to be pulled down, and people have made these commitments to the AWS and GCPs of this world. That is a threat for our distributors, and they recognize that. But I think what I've seen is that people have started to go, rather than going, the sky is falling, it's like, okay, how do I mitigate this? And how do I put myself in a better position to be able to defend my business? Now, you're not always going to be defend everything, but there are deals that sometimes go direct, right? That's just life. But how do you build your value so much so that if I've got a choice in how I'm going to go to market or who I'm going to deal with, that I see value in using you and having you in that piece? So that's one of the conversations that I always have with the distributors that I speak to, is what is your value proposition? What is the thing that, for me, if I'm a customer, I've got this easy route over here that's got one person in between me and the vendor, or a route over here that also puts a vendor is. Tell me why I've got that extra person. Help me understand what the value is to my business, what I'm missing out on if I don't go that route. And, that could be life cycle services. It could be migration services. There's all sorts of things that the disties are doing now that can bring value to that change. But they have to start talking about it and letting those customers know what that value piece is.
And so maybe moving ahead then, I think everyone's been calling out how distribution should have died or will die or could die. And I think we both firmly agree, never going to happen. My personal opinion, as we transition into AI, people who have the most data will
Yes,
win.
absolutely. I agree with that.
Talk to me about where you think the innovation over the next 3 to 5 years is going to happen.
I think it's exactly that, right? You're seeing, I think we're all I think everybody's a slightly different journey depending on how much time you've got on AI, right? There's some people who are just using Chat GPT. There are some that are using Perplexity, Claude, all these other things that you can pull into your arsenal to make your life more productive and get to market quicker. But what I see is exactly that AI move to integrate into processes that, might take 3 people to do. It's not getting rid of a job. You can now employ 3 people to maybe be a bit more focused on business development and finding white space, etc. So I think that you're right. AI and data for me with our disties is they've got so much of it. And I think in some cases it's better quality than some of what the vendor might have, right? So I think definitely those 2 things are going to play a key part as we move forward. And I'm really excited to see what they do with it, because some of them I think already on a long way on that journey about what their plan looks like and how it will kind of appear on market or how it will be, put out to market. And some others are at the beginning of that journey. But I think, like I said at the very beginning, reinvention is the key, right? And that's what our disties do well. So they kind of see these things and they have to adjust. And as you said, you maybe have to change direction a little bit. You maybe have to do things slightly different, but you've got to embrace all these new things to make you better to the market.
Awesome. Well, Claudette, just like I think vendors should leverage distribution data, I'm going to leverage some of your data. We always ask our current guest to recommend our next guest. Who did you have in mind?
Oh, that's a good one. Let me think. One person who I'm admiring their energy at the moment is a guy called Rob Tomlin. Rob works for a distributor called Exclusive Networks, and he is the recently promoted actually, but he's the VP of Northern Europe. So I think he would be a really cool guy to have a chat with, and he's also fun.
Amazing. Claudette, thank you so much for coming on, and excited to get Rob on soon.
No problem. Thank you.